The Little Works Engine, written by Slow Coach Studios. New arrival. It was a cloudy day at the works. Thomas was shunting trucks into a siding next to a water tower. "This wasn't my fault. It was that blasted diesel," he grunted as he backed away. A few days earlier, Thomas had caused an accident at Tidmouth. He had shunted some coaches over broken points and sent them into the platform, crushing it into rubble. Sir Topham Hatt had sent him to work at Wickman's, an extension to the Crovan's Gate Works, where he had to shunt for about 2 weeks. Thomas had tried to blame Diesel for putting oil on the rails, but all Diesel had said was, "I just got here, sir. How could I have done this?" he had smirked. The 3 coaches had not been damaged too much, but they had to be sent out to the works to be repaired. The same works that Thomas was at. "Irresponsible little thing," they would scoff as he passed them. He rolled his eyes as he recounted the incident. "I'll make sure he gets what's coming to him," he scowled. Suddenly, he was pulled out of his thoughts by a little whistle. He looked beside him to see a little engine stop. The little thing was painted black with red lining. LNER was painted on the side of him. The paint was faded, worn, and rusted a bit, but he was still in great condition. "Hello, who may I ask are you?" the little engine asked. His face was so low to the buffer beam that Thomas had to stretch his eyes to look at him. "What are you? A diesel?" he questioned, twisting his face in confusion. "Oh, well, I'm a Y1, one of the most successful shunter classes there is. Well, at least that's what I've been told," he smiled cheerfully, seeming to take no notice of the deflection. As Thomas was about to ask another question, Sir Topham Hatt had stepped out of the little engine, walking around to the front of the 2. "This is Quincy. I've brought him on trial from the LNER to help around the works," he said as he fixed his overcoat. "Does this mean I can leave?" Thomas perked up. Sir Topham Hatt just frowned. "No, Thomas. What you caused at Tidmouth is too great to let you off with a warning. Quincy might take over when you leave, but now he's here to help you with the shunting. So, you are to split the workload accordingly. Understood?" Thomas wanted to plead his case, but he knew it was no use. This Hat was more stubborn than his father. "Yes, sir," he pouted in response. "Good. Now show Quincy around and make sure he knows how things work around here." Sir Topham Hatt walked away to a waiting car that was parked maybe 20 feet away. Thomas groaned as the car rolled out of sight. Then he felt a pair of eyes burn into his smokebox. He looked over and saw Quincy staring at him. "What?" he said. "I'm waiting for you to be ready," he said with a little smile. "Ready? Ready for what?" Thomas racked his brain. "To show me around, as Sir Topham Hatt said." Quincy smiled. "Oh, right. Come on, then," Thomas sighed as he rolled back, with Quincy following suit. "And this is the inside of the works," he said unenthusiastically. Quincy, however, seemed to marvel at the works. There wasn't much to Wickman's. It was just a large building with a gantry crane going across the top. "This is nothing like the harbor I used to work at," he said, mouth still open. Thomas knew that what he had said was stupid, but he held back a rude response to the little engine's words. Surely he couldn't put the engine's spirit down that far. "Really? What harbor?" Thomas looked down at the little engine. "I don't know. It was a quiet harbor on my old railway. The men had me pulling cars back and forth and placing some cars in a disused siding. I thought it was strange, but the workmen said it was for a special train." Quincy took a deep breath. "Then a shady-looking engine would come pick them up once there were maybe 10 to 12 cars. Not that I judge engines regularly." Thomas processed what he had said. "So what happened after?" He spoke quietly, hoping to hide his curiosity. But Quincy had heard him loud and clear and continued. Well, after about 20 to 25 trips, my driver and fireman were arrested for what I believe was felony theft. Whatever that is, he said with a smile, looking up at him. Thomas was in shock. This engine was a part of a huge theft operation that had happened a few years back. Several railwaymen had been stealing thousands of pounds from the British government over the span of 2 years. They had stolen about 900,000 pounds. So your driver's name was James MacArthur, he stuttered. Yes, how did you know? Oh dear, I hadn't thought that his arrest was made so public. Oh, I do hope the missus are not being harassed by nosy reporters. Anyway, let's get to work, shall we? Quincy rolled forward to the front of a truck that was in a siding. Thomas's mouth was still opened as Quincy pulled the truck away. It had turned dark as Thomas shunted the last truck. Quincy was really helpful as well. He had shunted all the trucks on his side of the yard as he and Thomas had split it in two. No wonder they got that much in 2 years, Thomas muttered to himself as he shunted the last truck into storage, leaving it next to a flickering lamppost. Someone ought to fix that, he said, sniffing in the evening air. I can get a workman to fix that tomorrow. Thomas jumped. Quincy had stopped next to him on another siding. Geez, let an engine know before you spook them, Thomas sighed. Oh dear, I'm sorry, I hadn't meant to scare you. He frowned a little as he spoke, looking at his buffers. It's fine. Just whistle to let people know you're coming, okay? Thomas eased his voice, smiling softly. He figured he'd try to make Quincy's first day a bit better. Quincy's frowning face turned to confusion as he thought. How do you whistle again? The question was so simple, yet it stumped Thomas like never before. What do you mean, how do you whistle? Do you not have one? Thomas looked the little engine over. It seemed weird that this boxy engine was powered by the same thing he was. I don't know. I've always had to be quiet, Quincy said. Finally, he spotted a whistle in front of Quincy's funnel. Ah, there it is. He looked back at him. Quincy was staring up at his roof, trying to see it. Oh, so it is. I just blow steam out, right? He looked back at Thomas. Yep, like this. And he blew a quick peep. Quincy shut his eyes and puffed out his cheeks as he pushed. Finally, he let out a quick peep. His face seemed to gleam with excitement as he smiled. Oh, thank you, Thomas. It sounds wonderful, he smiled. Thomas had seemed to be warming up to Quincy. He was just an innocent little engine who needed some help with learning things. Well, I suppose we should head to the shed and get some sleep. Thomas started to back away. A shed? Quincy asked. Thomas stopped quickly, screeching on the rails a little bit. Have you never had a shed? He asked, thinking he knew the answer. Well, kinda. The only shed I had on the harbor was a goods shed, but I rarely slept in it. Usually I slept near the water on the siding. Sure, it was cold, but I'm not one to complain. He spoke in an unusually cheerful tone. Thomas had now felt guilty. He shouldn't have been so rude to him when he first got here. This poor little engine had been used for the biggest crime of the century, and made to sleep outside. He was left in this condition after, as well, when he was taken back to the LNER. Okay, we need to get you a fresh coat of paint, and fixed, Thomas decided. Whatever for? I'm perfectly fine now. Quincy backed up next to him. Because you need it. Come on, the shed is waiting for us, he smiled as he reversed down the yard line, with Quincy following. The shed wasn't too far from the works, but it was still around a bend. It was an older goods shed that had been modified to accommodate engines. The walls were makeshift and were prone to fall in once in a while. but it was a shed nonetheless. As the two backed into the shed, Quincy was smiling brighter than Thomas had ever seen. "Oh my! This shed is wonderful! It's so warm! Oh, and would you look at that!" In front of the shed behind the buildings was a setting sun. Its golden rays streamed across the sky. "Oh, thank you, Thomas. Today has been wonderful." Quincy stared at him with a sweet little smile. "I'm glad. And I'm sorry about this afternoon," Thomas apologized. "Oh, it's quite all right. From what Sir Topham Hatt had told me, he knows what happened at Tidmouth." He paused. "No. Tidmouth? Tidmouth. Anyway," he corrected himself. "You were grouchy, and I understand. No hard feelings," he said. "And he understands that it wasn't entirely your fault," he said, yawning a bit. "Good to hear. Now, I suppose we should get some sleep." "Good night, Quincy," Thomas said. "Good night, Thomas." Quincy had shut his eyes as he spoke. Thomas chuckled a little as he shut his eyes, letting the sleep watch over him like a fresh water at the washdown. Quincy works it out. Quincy woke with a yawn. He opened his eyes and blinked as sunshine beamed down. He looked around the shed and noticed Thomas was gone. "Oh dear, I've overslept. Get in quickly, driver. I can't be late." He peered back at his cab to see his driver rolling his eyes. "Don't worry, lad. We're not late. Thomas just left early." His driver patted his cab as he climbed in. "Oh, well, my apologies. I didn't mean to rush you." Quincy peeped his whistle as he rolled out of the shed, steam following behind. He had now been on Sodor for about a week, and he loved it. The trip from the mainland had been wonderful, as he had passed huge stations and large fields. The rails were lined with fences and bushes, making the line look like a pathway that had been carved out for any engine to run on. He had even made friends with some of the narrow-gauge engines at the station. He had made good friends with a small red engine called Ivo Hugh. They had talked for what seemed hours before he had brought Sir Topham Hatt to the works. Quincy smiled as he recalled. As he rounded the bend, he heard loud voices shouting, "This wasn't my fault! It was that damn truck!" Thomas was shouting with a coach that had fallen off a flatbed and landed on its side. "Yes, blame it on something else, just like you did at Tidmouth, you careless runt," the coach replied angrily, the other two agreeing from the side inside the works. "Why, you awful chicken coop!" Thomas, who was clearly hurt, bumped hard into the coach, knocking her back. Quincy sighed as he rolled up next to Thomas. All right, that's enough, you two. Thomas, go to the yard and shunt. I'll help the deer back up." He spoke calmly but firmly. Thomas was a bit taken aback by the tone of his voice, but he didn't say anything. He just rolled back and entered the yard and shunted the trucks. "All right, my dear. Shall we get you back up?" Quincy asked, rolling into a siding that had a crane in it. "Yes, please. I think my windows are cracked," she whimpered as clearly she was still upset. After 30 minutes of curses from the workmen, they had got the coach back up onto the flatbed. Thomas had retreated back to the shed to rest. At least, that was his excuse. "Thank you, little one. Oh, it's going to take longer for me to get back on the express now." She frowned as the workmen unhooked her from the chains. "Oh, don't worry, love. This is the best carriage work around. Well, I think. You'll be back on the express, was it? Anyway, you'll be back soon." He smiled sweetly as he pulled the crane away. "If I don't get knocked over again by that careless engine," the coach scoffed. "I'm sure he hadn't meant to hurt you. It was probably an accident." Quincy stopped next to a flatbed to talk with the battered coach. "Oh, I doubt that. Thomas can be so
careless sometimes. The only coaches he cares about are his precious Annie and Clarabelle," she said, the last part in a mocking tone.
"Doesn't that mean he has respect for all coaches?" Quincy inquired.
"Well, I suppose so, but he still ran us into the platform. I mean, look, I mean, goodness, I lost one of my bogies to it. And poor Fiona over there shattered her windows and had her wheels misaligned."
Quincy thought about the situation. Thomas obviously hadn't meant to knock her off the flatbed, as there was an overturned conflat in the space between the rails. But he had to convince the coaches that he hadn't meant it.
"Why don't you, talk it out with him? You can get his side of the story, and you can all apologize."
Quincy was cut off by a scoff from all three coaches.
"Not a chance. He went too far with the chicken coop comment."
She frowned at him.
"And you went too far by calling him a runt,"
Quincy said, eyeing the coach. The coaches went quiet as they thought it over.
"Oh my. Did I really say that?"
Her mouth fell with shame as she looked at the flatbed buffers.
"You said it in the heat of the moment, but that doesn't entirely excuse it. That's why I think it's better if you talk it out with each other."
Quincy smiled warmly.
"Yes, I guess you're right. Thank you, dear,"
she smiled back, having to look far down to see his face. "Now, I'm off to talk with Thomas. Hopefully you all can work it out," he said as he rolled slowly away. Thomas was sitting in the shed, murmuring to himself. He stopped when he noticed Quincy come around the bend. Quincy rolled to a stop next to him with a sweet smile.
"How are you doing?"
he asked as he stared up at Thomas. Thomas just sighed and blinked slowly. "Maybe I am a runt," he spoke quietly.
"Nonsense! You're the best tank engine I've met. Well, the only one, but I digress,"
Quincy said. Thomas seemed to chuckle a little bit by the remark. A small smile crawled its way onto his face. "There are plenty of tank engines on Sodor. You'll meet more," he said, staring down at him.
"Now, what makes you think you're a runt, besides what that coach said?"
Quincy asked. Thomas seemed to think hard about it, seeming to go back decades. "Well, I'm the only successful engine of my class. I've been modified to have a shorter wheelbase, bigger bunker, shrunken down to fit in tight spots." He continued to list off modifications. "I'm what the E2s were supposed to be. A fleet of 11 superior shunters. But now I'm the only one of the kind. Engines like me are considered the runt of the litter. Not quite the same engine or class, but the same nonetheless," he finished with a sigh. Quincy thought hard on how to comfort him. He spoke his next words carefully. "You're right. You are the runt of the E2s," he spoke calmly. Thomas gave him an offended look. I don't mean that in a rude way. Being one of a kind is something to take pride in. Sure, it does get lonely at times, but you have so many friends on this railway. Don't let the past get to your head. Live in the moment and take pride in being the last successful E2 there is. And as long as you're on the rails, well, you'll never be alone." There was silence in the shed as Thomas thought it over. Quincy hoped that those were the words he needed to hear. "You're right. Thank you." Thomas smiled at the little engine, sighing. "You're welcome. Now, how about we apologize to those coaches?" he asked. "It's the only right thing to do." Thomas started to puff forward. Quincy was sitting in a siding as he watched Thomas and the coaches happily talking and laughing.
Good. That should make this place more pleasant, he thought as he rolled out of the siding.
He was about to make his way into the works when a workman flagged him down. "I need the storage shed cleared. Henry is due to come in," the man said.
"On it."
Quincy quickly peeped his whistle and quickly sped off. As soon as he finished, he heard a strange horn.
"Having boiler troubles again, Henry," Thomas commented as Quincy rolled back onto the turntable.
Once he turned around, he saw a green diesel pushing a large steam engine, tender first, behind him. "No, Thomas, my cylinder's cracked and my tender is lopsided," Henry scoffed as he rolled his eyes.
"I've cleared a siding for you," Quincy smiled.
"Oh, hello there." Quincy looked at him with a warm smile, moving slowly past. "What's your name?" Henry towered over the little engine, his green paint glowing in the sun.
"Quincy, it's a pleasure to meet you," he smiled sweetly.
"That's a lovely name. See, Thomas, why can't you be like this little guy?" Henry smirked, rolling past him. Thomas rolled his eyes and simply puffed away. "Don't suppose you've had fun with that, have you?" a voice said, the quiet hum of an engine coming to a stop.
"Oh, hello. My name's Quincy."
He looked over at the big diesel. "My name is Boko. Are you new around here?" Boko asked.
"Yes, I've been here for about a week. Quite a lot of work,"
Quincy said. "Well, you've done a splendid job. This is the cleanest I've seen the yards." Boko smiled.
"Why, thank you. I didn't do it alone, of course. Thomas has been quite a help as well,"
Quincy said. "Well, I'm sure he has. Well, I best be off. It was nice to meet you, Quincy." Boko honked his horn and slowly rolled away.
"Goodbye,"
he peeped after him. Once Boko had left the yard, Quincy quickly got back to work. Still a lot of work to do, as he would put it. Quincy and the Promise. The day was hot and muggy. The yard was boiling with heat as Quincy puffed into the shed next to Henry. "God, this shed is warm," Henry groaned. He had been there for about 4 days, awaiting repairs. His tender was sitting at the opposite corner of the shed, wheels fixed. "It's no better out there," Quincy sighed, moving under the shade. "Oh," Henry looked over him. "I suppose your black paint isn't helping," he commented.
"It's not that bad. I just need to rest a bit. Though I would rather be working," he said.
"So would I," Henry chuckled.
Quincy made a little gasp. "Oh my, I am so sorry. I forgot you."
He was cut off by Henry. "Oh, there's no need. I know what you meant," he smiled. Quincy was pleased to hear that. He was about to talk further with Henry when a workman came up to him. "I need you to go to the station and pick up some trucks at the platform," he said.
"You got it, sir. I promise to talk with you later, Henry."
He quickly peeped his whistle and puffed away. As he rounded the bend, the Grand Station stood in front of him, the arches beaming in the light. Suddenly, as he entered the main line, a loud whistle sounded in front of him. He slammed on his brakes and shut his eyes. "Oh, sorry, little one. I didn't see you there," a voice said. Quincy opened his eyes to see a giant engine in front of him. He had 10 wheels and 2 large smoke deflectors, his orange paint like fire. Quincy strained his eyes as he looked up at the engine. The engine stared back down at him. "Are you okay?" he asked.
Yes, apologies for getting in your way,"
Quincy said with a little quiver. "Oh, don't sweat it. I'm Murdoch," he said.
"I'm Quincy."
Quincy smiled, lightening up a bit. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'd love to chat, but I have a train to deliver." Murdoch looked back. Oh, yes. Quincy backed up into the siding again.
Thank you very much.
Murdoch peeped as he passed. Once the end of his train cleared the points, Quincy started off to the goods platform. It didn't take too long for him to find the trucks, just 2 7-planks and a flatbed filled with boxes.
Ah, there we go.
He buffered up to them and waited for his driver to couple them to him. Hello again. Quincy looked over and saw Ivo Hugh sitting with a rake of coaches.
Oh, why, hello!
Quincy's face beamed. How are you settling in? Ivo Hugh asked.
Oh, quite well. Thomas is a pleasure to work with, and with that, there's plenty of work to do, he said.
Come on, Quincy, we've got things to do. His driver patted his buffer.
All right. Sorry to cut this chat so soon, Ivo Hugh, he said.
No bother. We'll talk again. Also, he said as Quincy puffed back, call me Ivo. No need for the Hugh. He peeped his whistle.
Okay. Goodbye, Ivo,
Quincy called as he pulled the cars back, straining a bit.
My, these are heavier than they look,
he muttered as he gained momentum. The trucks clanked against the buffers as Quincy pushed them under the lamppost.
That should do. I'll ask the foreman tonight if he wants them somewhere else,
he said as he was uncoupled. He puffed back to the front of the works when he saw the 3 coaches lined up, with Thomas in the front, smiling brightly. The coaches had new windows that glistened in the sun. All 3 had been repainted and fixed to perfection.
Whoa! You 3 look beautiful,
Quincy said. The coaches chortled in delight as Thomas spoke. Gordon's going to pick these up at Crovan's Gate. Want to send them off with me?
Oh, yes, please.
Quincy quickly ran to the turntable after saying hi to Henry. Once he backed down onto the train, he and Thomas pulled the 3 coaches out of the works. Hey, Quincy, Thomas asked.
Yes?
Quincy looked back. Thank you. You've made this place a lot better. Isn't that right, ladies? Thomas said.
Indeed,
the 3 coaches sang. Quincy blushed at the praise.
Oh, there's no need. I'm just doing what I do best, he said.
The cavalcade soon left the yard and set off for the station. It was about 8:30 by the time the 2 got back to their shed. The night was creeping up as the 2 talked and laughed. Then I told Percy that Sir Topham Hatt was retiring. My, he must have stayed at Knapford all day until he saw the man walk out of his office. Thomas chuckled.
He sounds quite fun.
Quincy smiled as he stared off into the sun. Yes, quite, Thomas said with a sigh. Tomorrow's my last day here. I'll be heading back to Farquhar in the morning, he said.
Oh, I forgot about that. Well, I'm glad I met you.
Quincy looked up at Thomas with a bright smile. I am as well. Don't worry, though. I'll come back and visit you. Thomas yawned as he finished. Quincy thought it was best to let him sleep.
Good night, Thomas,
he whispered as he shut his eyes, sighing deeply as sleep washed over him. Quincy woke to the sound of screaming. The shed is on fire! The shed is on fire! Someone, please! The voice came from around the corner. Quickly, Quincy gathered his senses and shook off the sleep as he sped out of the shed, leaving Thomas to wake himself. As he rounded the bend, he saw a raging fire ahead. The storage shed was ablaze with half of it engulfed in flames, with it quickly spreading. Quincy! Thank God you're here! Get me out! Henry was sitting in the middle of the shed, pleading with him, glancing up at the sagging roof. Charlie, get ready to couple me up! Quincy shouted over his whistle. His pistons groaned as it spun his little wheels, steam flowing out of his funnel. The points were already set to Henry, him looking thankful. Thank God you're here, he beamed as Quincy stopped in front of him. I promised I'd talk with you again, he said over the roaring flames. His driver got out and quickly coupled him to Henry. "Are you sure you can pull me?" Henry looked the little engine over.
"I'm sure. The worst of this is the heat." Quincy got ready to pull.
I suppose the black paint doesn't help," Henry slightly chuckled.
"Indeed. Now, 3, 2, 1,
Quincy yelled, quickly pulling back. He groaned as he pulled, wheels screeching on the rails. Sparks sprayed out from either side of him, blending in with the raging fire.
"Come on,"
he said as he strained, his chain drive clunking. Henry stayed silent as he slowly moved forward, inches from the sagging roof. He was trying his best when he saw Thomas puffing up to him. "Quincy, hold on!" He buffered up to him.
"No! Get the trucks!"
he yelled. From the far side of the shed was a line of scared trucks.
"They're just trucks,"
Thomas said.
"Thomas!"
Quincy glared back at him. Thomas reluctantly backed up and went into the shed, and quickly pulled the trucks out.
"Come on, Quincy!"
Henry started to panic. Quincy gathered up all his steam and pulled, his smoky face turning red. His black paint bubbled and his letters were covered by the immense heat. His boiler was shaken with boiling water. With one final heave, he pulled Henry out of the shed, just as the roof caved in.
"Quincy, you did it!"
Henry cheered. He was too tired to say anything. All he gave was a small smile. As he regained his breath, the fire crew came speeding in, quickly extinguishing the fire.
"Quincy,
are you okay?" Thomas asked as he puffed up.
"Yes, just so,"
he breathed, slowly moving back. Suddenly, he stopped. Looking down, he saw his chain drive laying across the sleepers.
"Oh dear, I might not be okay."
Quincy blushed. "It's all right. Let's let the fire crew sort this out," Thomas said as he buffered up to him, pulling Quincy towards the works. It had been a few days since the fire at the works. Quincy had been repainted and his chain drive fixed. He was out in 2 days after being checked over, where he would help clear the debris. Henry was also repaired and left the day after, still covered in smoke dust. It turned out that the cause of the fire was from a spark that had come from the broken lamppost, which ignited the cloth tarp of one of the trucks Quincy had brought from Groven's Gate. Sir Topham Hatt had come to the works to congratulate the 2 engines.
"Thanks to these 2 engines, Number 3 was saved from a tragic fire."
Sir Topham Hatt was standing on a crate, with the 2 engines in the siding next to him.
"But not only did they save Henry, Quincy insisted that they save a line of trucks as well. This shows that even though the rivalry of train and truck still stands, one can go out of their way to help the other in a time of need."
The man turned to Quincy.
"That is why I've not only decided to purchase you, but give you a medal for your bravery. Welcome to the railway."
Sir Topham Hatt smiled, putting the medal over his buffer. Quincy's face beamed with joy as Thomas whistled and the workmen cheered.
"Oh, thank you all. Oh, yeah."
Quincy started to move forward. "Where are you going?" Thomas asked.
"I have to tell Ivo. He'll be so proud,"
Quincy called back as he made his way to Groven's Gate, whistling a goodbye peep.